Hello and welcome to Perfectly Paranormal, episode 62. My name's Annaschmidt, and I'm here every week to share with you true paranormal encounters and information about devils, demons, and dark energy beings that no one else talks about. Truly, they don't. And today we're looking at something different. I want to share with you what I've experienced with the elemental realm. Now, these aren't technically dark beings, but they are energy beings from a different reality. And we're going to talk about these beings and how they live amongst us and what they get up to. Now, I've had various encounters over the years with gnomes. Yes, gnomes, believe it or not. These cheeky little rascals are real. And I've had experiences with everything from gnomes causing mischief in a friend's shed, another one kicking me in the kneecap several times, and one who was so annoyed that he poked a friend of mine in the forehead all night and jumped up and down on her bed. There was a reason why he did that, and we will get to it. And also I have a question from Jacqueline who asks about elementals. And I have a fascinating troll elemental experience that I shared back in episode 4, but I'm going to give you a recap because today we are talking about the elemental reality. So let's get into it with a quick outline of gnomes, like who they are, why they're here, and why they show up in people's homes. Now, gnomes are confident. They're feisty little earth-dwelling elemental beings. They generally care for the nature realm, tending to the gardens around our homes, the waterways, the forests and the mountainous areas all around the world. But they can be highly reactive if they feel threatened or their current living circumstances are suddenly disturbed. Now, this can be in the earth environment, but it can also be inside and outside of our homes. Gnomes are very materialistic and they love hoarding their favourite personal possessions. And they're not always their possessions. They like our things too. Now, from my experience, I have witnessed gnomes generally occupying cluttered rooms within homes, sometimes in garages, sometimes in sheds. They love things, ornaments, trinkets, treasures. Sometimes the things that we don't value are things that they value. And they do love offerings that make them feel really special. And this is one way that you can help reason with them to get them to vacate people's homes and mostly return to nature if you go about it the right way. Now, some gnomes, oh my gosh, they have a tendency to borrow our personal or our household items, such as keys, kitchen utensils, anything shiny, anything metallic or shiny or useful. They're very practical beings. They like useful things, like our own personal objects, like keys, jewellery, sometimes our mail, sometimes money. I don't know what elementals would do with our money. Maybe they go down the shop and spend it. Who knows? But these things can go missing, and sometimes they can also turn up again in really odd places, as you're going to hear what I share now. Now, a friend of mine had a very important letter that he had to mail the next day. So what he did, sealed up the envelope with all its important contents. He put it on the kitchen table under his keys so that when he went to the table the following morning, he would just grab everything, get in the car and go to work. But no. He got to the kitchen table. His keys were exactly where he left them, but the letter was nowhere to be seen. Now, he and his partner looked high and low. They literally turned the place upside down, but they didn't think to move the furniture. When they were moving out a few months later, they lifted up the couch, as you do, and there was his letter in pristine condition. It wasn't covered in a skerrick of dirt, dust, or anything else. It was just under the couch. They have gnomes on their property because they also feature in another story a little bit later on. And the gnomes really took a liking to these people's items, and they constantly appropriated objects for their collections. And sometimes I think they kind of do this out of spite as well, because they're a little bit naughty, a little bit mischievous. And I think they kind of like to see us sort of flapping around, trying to find things and getting in a fuss and getting in a tizzy. And they just sit back with their arms folded and have a good old giggle about it. So you're going to ask, how do you get your items back? Now, this is a really good question because gnomes aren't something that I generally deal with. They're not part of what I call the paranormal realm. They're in their own little dimension altogether. But I had to find a way that we could get the items back for the man in this next story. Now, this is a local Tasmanian story. He is a client, but also a friend from around about 2017. And I've called this story My Missing Spanner. I received a phone call from a woman whose partner, John, had items steadily going missing from his shed. Now, there was 3 people in this family, the husband, the wife, and a 2-year-old toddler. Now, the toddler could not possibly get out to the shed and misappropriate Dad's items. The shed was locked up over night time. It was all very secure. So who was taking these items? Where were they going? And what were they doing with them? Now, this family of 3 had recently moved into their new country home. And John, being a wood turner, was happily setting up this rather large, roomy, lovely shed, thinking about all the things that he could create in this beautiful space. He could be in there whiling away the hours, crafting his wonderful wood-turning creations. Now, soon after setting up and working out where his tools would go, where his lathe would go, all these different items, some of John's favourite tools started going missing. Now, it was really odd because, like we said before, they did all the debunking. And John was a very organised person. He knew exactly where he left something and you'd go back the next day expecting it to still be there. Now, I visited the family one afternoon, and as we're all sort of sitting there chatting and talking and laughing about paranormal investigations and different interests, because the lady of the house loved the paranormal, so she and I got on really well. This is how we actually met. And then I went and met the family, and they had this issue in their shed. Now, as we're sitting there, just having a good old chuckle and a cup of tea, I suddenly saw in my mind like an image of a group of little people in an outbuilding on the property. Now, I hadn't been out to the backyard. I simply come in the front door, first time meeting this lady. We talked online a little bit through a social media platform, but I'd never actually met them in person. So you're not going to go sort of traipsing around their property having a good old sticky beak. You're going to meet them first, have a conversation, and then possibly go and look around the property. As I'm sitting there and I'm seeing in my mind, I'm seeing the shed. It was very old. It was rather large, a little bit run down on the outside, but John loved it. He just thought it was great. He would have so much fun creating his wooden bowls and his cups and his wooden pens and everything that he created. He loved the space. Now, what I was seeing were these little group of people, probably about 30 centimetres tall. They were kind of pottering and poking about in the old shed. And these interesting little folk, they sort of wore sort of pointy red hats from what I could see. They either wore blue or teal or a kind of forest greeny coloured shirt, which had sort of wooden buttons down the front. And none of them wore any pants, which I found quite funny. But they did have long shirts, if any of you are wondering out there. But I mean, really, I'm not focusing on what their bodies look like. It was just an interesting observation about what they were wearing. Now, they seemed quite at home, as you would be without your pants on. Now, ignoring the 3 of us, they kind of wandered into the house. And I'm sitting there and John's looking at me like, are you all right? And I'm looking at him with my physical eyes, and in my mind, I'm seeing these little beings wandering into the house. And when I mentioned it, the lady of the house said, oh yeah, I see them too. They go into my son's room, they play with his toys. Sometimes his things go missing, but I just thought, oh, he's just sort of lost them in the house somewhere. Now, these little beings seemed quite at home, and they ignored the three of us sitting in the kitchen. They're just moving about the property, and she said they do this all the time. But it was kind of like they weren't interested in us at all, and I felt a little bit like we were being shunned or kind of given the cold shoulder treatment. And you're going to find out soon why that occurred. Now, we were still sitting there discussing this problem of the missing tools when I heard in my head, take them an offering. Oh, that's a good idea. And I've used this quite often since then. I very excitedly shared that information with the house owners, and they just kind of looked at me like, you're a bit weird, aren't you? And I went, no, an offering is a way of building trust. It's almost like a peace offering. It's like a way to build a connection with these energy beings that are in the shed and roam through the house. Now, Kay, the lady of the house, she made the most delicious shortbread biscuits. I can tell you that because I think I had probably about 3 or 4 or maybe even more. And I suggested taking them out a plate of homemade biscuits. And John's sitting there sort of sipping his beer out of a stubby, and he went, oh, I might give him a small glass of beer as well. And as the shed was John's space, I thought it would be appropriate for him to be the one to take out the offering. And he's kind of looking at me like, are you for real? And I'm like, yes, I don't live here. There's no point me doing it. You need to build a relationship with these beings. Kay might go into the shed every now and again to get something. So these beings have to be comfortable with both of you. But John gets to start the process happening. Like he's just looking at me, just a blank look on his face. And he kind of went, yeah, all right, I'll do it. So we had this plate of goodies and off he went to the shed with his biscuits and his glass of beer. Now he was gone sort of no more than 10 minutes when he came back. And he said he felt a little bit of a fool, but he did what he was instructed. Now, he sat there and he had a conversation with these beings like he was talking to thin air. But he had the conversation. He was polite. He was friendly. He gave them the offering. He left it there for them. And then he came back out of the shed. Now the waiting began. And after about 20 minutes or so, John was really eager to take a little peek in the shed. So he kind of casually walked out, opened the door, and sort of started looking busy, looking for some bits of wood through all the piles of black wood and sassafras and hewn pine that were all stacked in a corner. And as he was rummaging around, right near his foot, he found his spanner. Now, it wasn't there when he went in. And he's like, there might be something to this. Now, he picked up his spanner, and he said, thank you very much for returning my spanner. I really appreciate it. And over the next couple of days, he said that his other tools start to return as well. Now, some of them were in slightly unusual places. They were still in the shed, but they were just in places that just you wouldn't leave a spanner. So he knew that he didn't do it. But eventually, everything reappeared. There's 3 reasons that come to mind in this situation, because I'm a very practical thinker, so I like to think about these things in a very sort of practical, kind of rational way. Now, are these energy beings from another dimension actually living in the same space as us, but in their reality at exactly the same time? Were the gnomes at home in their elemental reality, and then some random humans just start coming in and moving into their space and creating chaos, which is very, very possible that they were thinking this way. We can't always see these beings, but they can see us, and they can often get annoyed when we move in on their territory, as I've seen all too often now. And before we look at number 2, something's just popped into my mind. I went to do a house clearing for a lady one day. Now, she lived in the country, like this is country, out in the middle of nowhere. There isn't a house for kilometres around. So there was one older lady living in the family home. I think she had a dog. Can't really remember. It was a little bit too far back now to remember the full sort of situation. But in her back bedroom, I was there with a friend. There was only me, my friend, and this lady and her dog in the house. We could hear, in this back bedroom, we could hear glasses clinking. We could hear music. It was like there was another reality, maybe a parallel reality, maybe another dimension, all happening in that same place in that bedroom. And maybe there was a portal doorway open that these sounds and this energy was coming through. So why I mentioned that was it's a similar setup to this home. Are these gnomes living in their home in the same place that John's shed is? And there's been no one in the shed for years. The people that lived there before John and Kay never used the shed. It was just derelict. It was just left. So these beings didn't have an issue with humans invading their space. So let's look at number 2. The elemental beings in John's shed chose to reside there because they like the building in this reality. You've got to think outside the box when you look at these things. Like I said, I don't know everything about the elementals. Who does? No human could possibly know everything about the energy world around us. So these beings were in this little building. In the backyard, there was lots of blackberry bushes. There was fruit trees. There was apple trees. There was pear trees. They were away from the road. And there was no noise and there was no chaos of humans until the family moved in. So these beings had felt like their space had been invaded again, but they were living in this reality, which is another option. Now, number 3, were these gnomes that were living in this reality or their own reality, are they builders? Are they wood carvers? And did they fancy some new tools? Like John had some rather interesting tools that went missing. Can't tell you the names of them. And did they think that John wouldn't notice if his wood-turning tools went missing? You know, it's a possibility that they just simply liked the items that he had. Now, in all these situations, a bit of polite conversation and a peace offering. Now, it doesn't have to be beer and biscuits. Now, this reminds me of a situation where there was another offering that was made. It wasn't so much a peace offering, it was more a welcoming and we're happy to have you here type offering, where some friends of mine lived out in the country again, here in Tasmania. And I went to visit them one day and they had a lot of boxes sort of packed up in a corner. Now, these weren't gnomes. This being wasn't a gnome, but somehow this being had got sort of trapped in the energy of this space. And as I'm saying goodbye to the ladies, they said to me, look, just have a look through the boxes. If there's any DVDs you would like, or if there's anything there you would like, please feel free to take it because it's all going to charity. Anyway, I'm standing there in this space and I started to feel really unwell, like in my mind, like I'd gone from feeling totally normal to feeling very unwell, a headache, a stomach ache, brain fog, feeling a bit wobbly in the head. I said to them, I don't feel well and I don't know what's going on. Because you've got to remember, I don't work with elementals. I look at the paranormal side of things. And they said to me, you've got someone around you. And I went, yeah, I can feel the energy of this very powerful being. Now, it turned out that this being was a land guardian. There was also a little bit of a story later on about another land guardian. We have so many different realities of energy beings, including us, within the earth. Like there are so many overlapping layers. Now, this energy being had somehow come into the house, or he'd come into the house simply to say hello or to listen to our conversation. Maybe he was lonely, but he was there. And these ladies didn't know what to do. And I'm like, I don't feel well. I don't know what to do either. I couldn't think straight. I said, how about we all walk out to the garden, go and stand in the orchard that was behind the house. And whoever this being was followed us out. And I think he was maybe a little bit lonely. He was just looking for an acknowledgement. I mean, these beings that here as land guardians, they're kind of stationed in a place. And for whatever reason, it's probably multi-dimensional reasons which I can't give you, this being was in their backyard in the country. Maybe there was a portal there. Maybe there was a very important vortex of energy that needed to be open and he was the guardian of this vortex. Anyway, these lovely ladies, they put in together a special plate of wasn't a peace plate, it wasn't an offering, but it was kind of was. It was more a let's share a meal together type plate. And what they put on this plate was some honey, some homemade bread, there was a little bit of butter, a couple of lollies, and I think some nasturtium flowers. Now, these ladies left this out in the garden, and they have wallabies and they have rabbits, and we live in Tasmania, they've got possums. So we've got all our own little native animals that get around over night time. Nothing touched the plate for 3 days. And when they went out there every day to check, everything was still there, which was really odd. You leave food out overnight time here, you come back and there'll be nothing. The plate will be upside down, everything will be eaten. Everything was still on that plate. They went out there the 4th day. Someone had unwrapped the lollies. These ladies didn't have children. No children in the house, no children sort of in the neighbourhood. It was very country place again. So had this energy being unwrapped the lollies and enjoyed a sweet treat. If it was animals that were eating it, they'd eat through the paper. You'd find bits of paper sort of strewn around the backyard, but there was nothing like unwrapped, like humans had unwrapped them. Anyway, I thought you might just find that as a little interesting sidestep into talking about the offerings. Before we hear our second experience with the rather unspeakably naughty gnome behaviour, I have a question that came from Jacqueline, and she asked, "Hi Anna, I was wondering if I could ask you something regarding the elementals you speak to before you do a house clearing. When you ask their permission to enter the property, do you see them? And if you do, what do they look like?" She said, "I'm doing a course on fairies and fairy magic of Tasmania. And while I've got lots and lots of books that I've collected over the years, I'm really curious about your interactions with these energetic beings." Now, I had to really sit and think about this because the response that I wrote was around what I call land guardians. Now, they may be elementals, but I'm not exactly sure on that. These are only words that we use. Land guardians may be elementals. They may be something else. Elementals may call themselves something else. But it is just a term that is it's a term that's used by lots of people to discern the difference between paranormal beings and the fairies, pixies, gnomes. So my response to Jacqueline was, when working with properties, I don't technically speak with elementals, but more so, I feel the land and the house guardians' presence. Now, they could be elemental, they might not. It's a type of energetic force that I feel. When I look at a picture of a property and I'm asking permission to energetically enter to do a house clearing, I will feel the yes that is given. Sometimes there's no response, and I also take that as a yes. But if I get this bursting sort of wave of no, you can't enter, I just don't do it. I won't enter. If I get a no is a no. And I'll talk to the client and we'll try and reason with this being and find out why I'm not allowed to enter. But generally it's a yes. So I did say to Jacqueline, though, that I have encountered gnomes more often than any other elemental beings. They're not technically connected to the land guardians. I don't really encounter fairies or elves. I do come across the occasional pixie who can be slightly naughty and mischievous and very tricky, and they're known to pinch people if they get annoyed. Now, another little sidestep. A friend of mine in the UK, this is all related to elemental beings. A friend of mine in the UK came face to face with a pixie one day. She was very excited telling me about this. She lived in places where, because she moved around a lot, she lived in places where there were lots of forests, lots of brooks, lots of beautiful little streams with greenery, and just imagine the most beautiful nature scene you can think of. That's where she lived. Now, she was walking along a path one day, just minding her own business, just walking sort of home towards her cottage, when she heard this sort of distant sound of someone running. And when you hear something like that, you'll look up. Like you're looking around. And like, I can't see anybody. There was no background sounds other than the trees sort of rustling and the wind and all that sort of thing, but you could hear the footsteps, very distinct footsteps of someone running. Now, looking at adult height, she couldn't see anyone. Looking at child height, she couldn't see anyone. She looked down to the ground. Oh, my goodness. As she looked down to the ground, she got this glimpse of someone running full pelt past her. Now, she screamed, and she screamed so loudly that this little being screamed as well. Like they seriously surprised each other. Now, from her very quick glimpse of this being, it was small. It was about 20 centimetres tall, and it wasn't an animal. It was definitely a person running on 2 feet. She described this little being as fully clothed, slightly dirty face is all that she could remember, as this being kind of whizzed past her, and the little running footsteps sort of jumped off into the bushes and away it went. Now, I remembered that because this lady was very in tune with elementals. So it makes me wonder if people who are in tune with different levels of energy can see or feel or hear the different levels of energy beings. Like me, I work with the paranormal. So I sense dark demonic beings. I sense spirits that are around us. Now, I thought you might enjoy hearing her experience with this little running pixie. She said it's not a gnome. It's not what I've seen in the books. This definitely looked like what she called a pixie. But anyway, now we're going to slip into our second encounter with gnomes. Yes, gnomes again, because gnomes feature a lot in houses, and that's where I work. Now, sometimes gnomes can be very naughty when we step into what they think is their territory, as we've already said. Now, this is a slightly different experience. This wasn't in a shed. This one was actually in a house. And I've called this experience My Room. Now, a family decided to clean out the spare bedroom, as you do. Their teenage daughters were getting older and they needed their own space. They just needed space away from each other. They needed their own room. So this idea was rather excellent in theory until they found out that there was a gnome living in the spare room. Now, this came about because over a weekend, the family had really put their minds to it. We are going to be sorting out this bedroom. They got in there and they were busily sorting through all their pre-loved items. They were sorting it into different groups of, resell, charity shop, and objects to keep, but store sort of elsewhere in the house. But little did they know that they had disturbed a rather feisty gnome who'd been quite happily just living in the house amongst all his treasures until now. Like generally they didn't go in that room. It was just left. It was the place where you put things that you wanted to forget about. I think we all have spaces like that in our homes. Now, this untidy room was soon cleared and transformed into a beautiful, comfortable getaway for the oldest daughter. Now, the family were thrilled. It was a real accomplishment to work together and to clean and clear this room and to create this beautiful space. And the girls stood in the doorway just admiring this new bedroom creation. Now, the first night, the oldest daughter slept in her new room, as you would, but she experienced really disturbed sleep. She couldn't put a finger on what it was, but she just said, it's probably just because I'm in a new sleeping space away from my sister. Now, the next night, she felt something or someone jumping on the bed. Now, it wasn't just one jump, but it was like consistent little jumps, like bouncing on the bed. It was very, very annoying. And she said it was keeping her awake all night. Now, she got sick of it about 2 a.m. and she got out of bed, slippers on, ran to tell her parents. And of course, parents don't really want to get out of bed 2 o'clock in the morning unless they really have to. But they did. They dragged themselves very sleepily out of bed to have a look. Now, when they arrived at the doorway, the room was still and quiet. So the parents kind of looked at their daughter with blank looks, as you do at 2 o'clock in the morning when you'd rather just be asleep, and they returned to bed. Now, they'd not seen anything out of the ordinary, so they were like, she's probably just been dreaming. Now, the third night, well, that was really the last straw. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. With all the jumping on the bed and now being constantly poked on the forehead by this little tiny invisible finger, was very disruptive. And she said she was just trying to sleep, just trying to ignore it. Am I dreaming? What is going on? Instead of getting her parents up in the middle of the night, she just tried to make it through the night. And she spoke to her parents again the next day. They're sitting there at breakfast, and she just kind of spilled the beans about the poking and the prodding and the jumping on the bed again. Now, the parents knew me already, so they were quite comfortable in ringing and sort of offloading all this rather strange information. And they explained sort of the nightly chaos in their new bedroom. I knew exactly what it was, because this was now probably my third, fourth or fifth experience dealing with gnomes. I just knew instantly what it was. And these antics, I've seen them before. I've experienced them myself to a certain degree. So what I did is I had the address and I just asked permission to tune into the room's energy. And yep, there were gnome pranks going on. They were causing the disruptions. All the nightly issues weren't her nightmares, weren't her dreams, weren't the chocolate that she ate before she went to bed, but was simply these little energy beings were upset. The family had unexpectedly upset a male gnome. I don't know if males are worse than females. Probably depends on personality, just like with people. This gnome had been residing in their old spare room for years, and he was so annoyed that all his most prized possessions were removed. That he went, right, how am I going to let her know? What am I going to do to let her know that I'm upset? So we decided to make the poor oldest daughter's sleep time a living nightmare. Now, I had a very polite conversation with this gnome. Initially, I saw him in my mind because I'm very visual sometimes with energy beings. And when they don't want to talk to you, they'll either show you why they're upset or you'll feel it in waves of energy. It's like being hit by an energy ball. Anyway, this little fellow, he was waving his arms about and he made rude gestures. And I'm just sitting there calm and patient. I'm just waiting for him to just get it out of his system. And eventually, when he calmed down, he understood why the bedroom or why the room had been converted into a bedroom. Like he was still seriously miffed. He was still upset all the same. And he kind of strode about angrily up and down the room, mumbling to himself. Now, I just let him calm down. I said to him, it'll all be okay. Let me go and speak to the family. So I rang my friend and I spoke with her. And we sort of came to a compromise that the gnome could move out into the shed and that the family would store some of those items that had got moved out of the room that they decided to keep. They would store some of those items out in the shed and that he could have them as his treasure and that he wouldn't be disturbed unless the lawnmower needed to be retrieved and then returned again. So this energy being, this little elemental, he could then tend to the gardens as well because he would have a purpose again. He wouldn't just be sitting in his bedroom. But seriously, they must get bored, thinking from a human perspective. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But anyway, if he wanted to tend to the garden as well, he could do that because gnomes, like I said earlier, are the nature carers. They're out there caring for the environment. He'd calmed down enough that this proposal was agreed to. So he was seriously happy to move out into the shed where he would have his own space, he'd be in his own time, and he'd have his trinkets back again. So I hope you enjoyed that little story. These are all 100% absolutely real experiences that I've gone through. I never really believed in the elementals. I mean, I like the thought of dragons. I like the thought of pixies and elves and fairies, but I'd never actually seen them. I've only really worked with the gnomes and my friend who had the experience with the pixie. Now, we're getting into a story now from 2021. Now, this is a slightly more painful experience that I had. And I've called this experience Take That. Now, I don't know much about the elemental realm, like I keep saying. It's not my main focus of interest, but occasionally our paths cross and I come up against a problem in a home that doesn't fit into my normal house clearing work. Now, this experience is one of these problems. Now, there were 3 little elemental beings living in the attic of a 3-story home in a suburban area of North Dakota in the US. Now, the family in this home had moved into the house. Now, some of the furniture was already there. They'd never really been into the attic much, other than to store a few more items. Because you know what it's like when you move into a house that's already got stuff in it. You don't really generally want to go poking through it. You're busy setting up your own home. You're busy getting organised, and you'll think one day I'll go through the attic and just see what's up there. Now, the family, they were having items going missing, like keys and kitchen items, like random things you would use in the kitchen. And crystals. One of the daughters had crystals in her bedroom. They said they weren't irresponsible. They weren't sort of just leaving their stuff lying anywhere. They were fairly organised, so they knew where their things were. Now, apart from items going missing, they were hearing strange scratching or dragging sounds coming from the attic. Sometimes in the day, but mostly at night. And it was quite unnerving to be lying in bed, hearing strange sounds like something's being dragged across the ceiling. When they were confident enough, they plucked up the courage to go to the attic. In a group, mind you, not by themselves. They all had torches in hand, and they expected to find raccoons, rats, or some sort of other invasive rodent. But there was nothing. As soon as the key clicked in the door to the attic, the sounds stopped. The parents' bedroom was located directly under the main portion of the attic, and the parents had endless, sleepless nights, and it was starting to really drive them crazy. Now, Ken, the father, he was scouring the internet looking for someone to help, and he came across my website. And being a non-believer, total skeptic in the possibility of a paranormal or other cause for their issues, nonetheless, he was desperate. Like seriously desperate for someone to come and stop these nightly noise nuisances. He'd finally conceded that the issues, they're not tangible. There's no rodents, there's no wind blowing, there's no rafters that are squeaking, there's no tiles on the roof that are loose. You know, these things would happen on a non-windy night, on a calm night. So it's not the wind, it's not something tangible. So what is the problem? So after receiving the floor plans to the home for each level of the homes, receiving a picture of the front and the back of the house, because I like to look at the home as I'm working on it, and the address, I went through my usual process of clearing the land. Then I started moving into the outbuildings, the sheds, the garages, the carports, then moving into the house, floor by floor, leaving the attic till last, because I like to start at the bottom and work to the top. It's just my process. And as I finished with the second floor, I went and made myself a cup of tea, and I thought I'm going to come back and I'm going to tackle the attic. Now, something I may have mentioned or may have not mentioned in other episodes is that energy beings are aware of what we're doing. Now, generally, it's the paranormals that I know do this, is that when I'm about to start a job, I'll get visits the night before. I'll get pokes, prods, pushes in bed. I might have disturbed sleep. It's just they're feeling a bit disgruntled because they have to move house. It's like anyone that's going to be evicted from their home. They're a little bit annoyed, a little bit confused, a bit upset. So they'll come and poke me and prod me, and I just talk to them and I say, look, if you're from that house, it's okay. You're not going to be harmed in any way. You just need to move house. That usually calms them down. Now, this was different. When I came back into my room, it felt different. There was kind of like a buzz in the air. It wasn't hot, wasn't cold, it wasn't a temperature change. There was this buzzing frequency in the air, and I went, okay, I'm just going to observe. That's my usual point of call, is what I do. So I don't call things out. I don't get disrespectful. I just observe what's happening. So sitting at my desk, like I said, I just observed the energy, possibly any energetic intruders that may be in the room and why he or she might be there. Picking up my pendulum, which is my tool that I use when I do my house clearing, I'm sitting there and I'm all relaxed and I'm just waiting for my ready swing, waiting for the pendulum to be ready to start work. And I was looking at the floor plan of the attic and I was so totally focused on it, sort of assessing where to start. And generally what I do is it's like if you were to walk into a house, you're going to walk up the stairs to the attic, and then you're going to look at that main area near the door. Then you're gradually going to work along to the furthest most point. That's generally how I work. And then out of nowhere, I suddenly felt a very swift, sharp pain under my left kneecap. It was the weirdest sensation. It would be like, if I can equate it to something in reality, it'd be like a child coming along who's upset. You've upset your toddler and they come along and they give you a kick in the knee because they're just like, I'm so annoyed at you. That's what it felt like. And that's how I can explain it to you. But it was so sharp and unexpected that I let out a very loud, ow, what the... And then within 10 seconds, that kick was followed by another one and then another one. And I went, stop. I said, who is this? Who is this kicking me? And I bent over looking under the desk. Now, my question that came out in a very loud voice, which I didn't mean to, my question was met with silence. And then, with my physical eyes, not my third eye and in my mind, I saw a kind of energetic shift next to my desk, which is a bit like, how can I explain it? If someone's cloaked under some sort of invisibility cloak or a shield of some sort, I could see this little wavering outline. So I knew there was someone there, and not a very big someone either. Very small someone, around about 20 to 30 centimetres tall. You know where I'm going with this. And in my mind, this time they showed themselves, it was a sort of 20 to 30 centimetre tall being with earthy coloured brown pants, a blue shirt and a red pointy hat. And he was not happy. His little face was red, it was puffed up, and his eyes looked like they were going to burst. You know what people are like when they get really angry? Well, transfer that to a little miniature-sized energy being. And it finally occurred to me, because sometimes it takes me a while to wake up to things, that this entity was from the attic in the house, because it was the only thing I'd been focusing on that day. I had no problems the day before. I had no problems in the morning. It was just when I got into the attic that there was actually an issue. So this is where you've got to be very practical when you do energy work. You've got to think about all the different scenarios and things that could be happening. So as I thought that, in my mind, I saw this little angry being again. And he had his arms folded. And then there was two more little faces that appeared behind him. And I'm like, I've upset someone. And it wasn't intentional, but these things happen. So in my usual fashion, I said very calmly and very quietly, if you're living in the attic of, and I say the address, and I point to the picture of the house on my laptop, I said, I'm not going to harm you, just here to give the house an energetic clean. So I clear all the emotional imprints. I look for portals, black magic. They're nodding. I could see them nodding. I remove all the paranormal entities. I ask if there's any spirits present that wish to transition into the afterlife. There was silence. And I'm seeing these beings, they're not really moving. They're just kind of looking at me. They're sort of assessing the situation. They're probably assessing whether the next wave of knee-kicking attacks was necessary. And then in my mind, again, like very suddenly, these beings are so quick to act. They simply just turned around and left my room. And within about, 5-10 minutes, the energy of the room changed and it felt settled again. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, gnomes again. These little blighters are everywhere. They're coming up in lots of different places within homes. And now I know when I go into a home, like physically visit a home, that maybe people have been hoarding things or they've got lots of collections and things are going missing and they show, look, oh, that's the junk room, don't go in there. I'm like, there may be elementals on this property. So I learn through every job that I do. So now in 2024, I know that gnomes are what we call the bowerbirds of the elemental realm, the collectors, the treasure lovers of the elemental realm. And as we as humans accumulate a lot of stuff and items and boxes of what we think is junk sometimes, and things that need tossing out, but to gnomes, they have value, and they want to keep our things as much as we want to clear them. Sometimes some of them have to stay. Now, I decided to talk to the homeowners. Back to this story again. I always get sidetracked. I had a quick talk with the homeowners over email and we came up with a plan. Like I said earlier, gnomes love treasure. And in that attic, there were antiques that belonged to the previous owners. And there were also the newer treasures that the family had put up there. And even the very sceptical, the super sceptical husband was quite happy to agree for the gnomes to be caretakers for these items. And that the one stipulation, well, two stipulations. One was that they made no noise for night time and that they weren't to take items from the house that the family used. Now, the family were kind of excited to have these little energy beings in their attic, and the kids used to call them house fairies. And I'm very happy to say that the energy of the home improved over the next few days, and even the nights were silent, much to the family's delight. This really happy compromise had been agreed to. Now, this is a quick recap of an experience that I had with a troll back in episode 4. Yes, trolls exist too. I didn't know it was a troll at the time until I spoke to a friend in the UK and I described this energy being that I'd come across. And he went, "Oh yeah, that's a troll. We have them here." And I went, "Wow. I've never had that sort of close encounter with this sort of elemental being before." Gnomes are a different thing altogether. They all have their own personalities. They're just like people. These energy beings are all different. So trolls, as far as I know, they just belong to the elemental realm. They may belong to a different reality, but we just kind of lump them into the elemental realm. They are shy and they like to be left alone to go about whatever their business is in this reality. Now, he had a job to do there. He had a job in our reality, similar to the land guardian that was in my friend's backyard, where there was this massive portal in the backyard. This energy stuff just blows my mind. You can't possibly understand it all. So I just do my best to explain it to you from my experiences. Now, I had some lovely interactions with this troll. I never fully saw him, but I do describe him in episode 4, why he was there, what he got up to, and the fact that he became so comfortable with my energy and so trusting that he started to ask for items from my house, which was quite funny. It's like he'd been in my house, well, either when I was asleep or when I was doing something, and he'd been looking around. Like I said earlier, energy beings can just travel here, there, everywhere in the blink of an eye. They just move about in our environment. And in episode 4, I share what he wanted and what he wanted to do with these things. So if you want to hear the full story, it is a lovely, sweet story. And he really was a great big furry sweetie. He really was lovely. And I hope that one day I get to meet him again. I don't visit the location where he is very often, but like I said earlier, he likes to be left alone. He knows where I am. I'm sure if he wanted to visit, he would come and say hello. So in episode 63, we are talking dark beings and their stinky habits, believe it or not. Some of them drop the most disgusting smells. We're going to talk about why they do it, what they get out of invading our noses with the stinkiest stinks that you could possibly imagine. And they love to either watch us scramble, or they do it to frighten us, or they do it to keep us away from a particular location, or they're purely just doing it for the fun of it. So if you want to hear some of my experiences with these stinky beings and some of the information I've gathered, tune in to episode 63 next week, and I look forward to seeing you there. So thank you for joining me today, and don't forget, if you want to share a paranormal experience just with myself, or you would like me to share one of your experiences through my podcast, you can do a voice recording, or you can write out your experience and I will read it exactly as you have written. You can email me at spiritualbeing44@gmail.com. And for information on paranormal house clearing, you can visit my website, Spiritual Being. You will find the address in the description box. And I look forward to sharing this spooky space again with you next week. And remember, life is perfectly paranormal.